All right, they win, you lose. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Now, my daughter asked me about the whole Silicon Valley Bank meltdown last night, and the best explanation I could come up with was this. All right, sweetheart, the next time you play Monopoly, allow one of the players to have unlimited money from a federal government, meaning every time they lose money, they get it back, and then see who wins the game every time. Of course, the Biden administration was scurrying to try to convince everyone that it wasn't really bailing out the bank at all. No. It depends on what the meaning of the word bailout is.
Let me be clear that during the financial crisis, there were investors and owners of systemic large banks that were bailed out, and we're certainly not looking, and the reforms that have been put in place means that we're not going to do that again.
Well, they don't want to call it what it is for one reason and one reason only: 2024. Now, as absurd as it is, Biden is once again going to try to run as working class Joe like he did in 2020. And so he must get all of his media pals to do backflips to convince America that this was a one-time thing.
In order for you to believe that this is a one-off and they have this under control, you have to believe that 3 years of massive fiscal policy spending that we've never seen before will have only a limited impact on the financial plumbing of the economy and the markets. And that seems absurd. Banks take risk. And all the banks took the type of risk these guys were taking, particularly with short-term liabilities and long-term assets mismatch. You put that together, that's toxic.
Toxic indeed. He's 100% correct. Now, this isn't 2008, at least not yet, when the housing bubble burst completely. It's a bailout triggered by risky moves by the bank, the depositors, precipitated by the Biden team's refusal to deal with inflation back in early 2021. Instead, what they did is they spent trillions of dollars, printed money, drove up inflation, and now this is going to cost real people real money to fix.
The administration says that's not going to come out on the taxpayer. Do you believe that?
Well, I don't understand how it doesn't come out on the taxpayers. I can't figure that one out. So I'd like you to explain it to me. I don't know who's paying it. How do they pay that?
Of course, the taxpayers pay the bill. Where's the money going to grow on trees? But were it not for Biden, the poor depositors, they would have lost everything we see. Well, again, Biden's team is partly responsible here, and those being bailed out aren't exactly destitute grandmothers. They're sophisticated investors and they're sophisticated players who made deposits in this bank in excess of what the FDIC clearly ensures. They all knew that they were taking a risk in keeping that money in that one bank, but they did it anyway. Now, here's a partial list of the businesses that you are bailing out. Roku had $487 million in SVB. iRhythm Tech had $54 million. Bill Holdings had $300 million. Something called Ginkgo Bioworks had $74 million. Roblox, $150 million. Lending Club, $21 million, and the list goes on and on. Well, you can't make a moral hazard argument here, though, say the globalists. That's not fair. Larry Summers tweeted today that this is no time for moral hazard lectures or lesson administering or for alarm about political consequences. But my question is, when is the time, right, to ensure that there are consequences for bad financial decisions in our banks? Is any time the right time? The truth is, when those taking undue risks are mostly members of the liberal elite class, it's never a good time to talk about moral hazards. If you're a darling of Wall Street or Silicon Valley, being reckless actually pays off. Talk about bad incentives for future bad behavior. But how many of you think that the Biden administration would have rushed in to rescue, let's say, a regional farmers bank in Alabama, where 8/10 of all the deposits are over $250,000? Well, Andrew Ross Sorkin and a few others described it this way in the New York Times Deal book today. If SVB was just a small regional bank that did not have ties to loud, politically connected venture capitalists and the tech community, it might have been allowed to die, and its customers, individuals, and small businesses would have suffered. Instead, because it's Silicon Valley, it commanded attention. But again, the experts brush all of this off. This was an extraordinary situation. It was an emergency. They always scream emergency, though, don't they, when you're about to get your pocket picked and your constitutional rights trampled upon. From the pandemic to Ukraine to, of course, the famous bailouts and TARP programs in 2008. The government looked the other way when all the bogus financial instruments pushed the housing bubble to burst, causing a massive pain for American families. But as usual, the banks like J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, they got their big checks from the government. Every time the elites run the same playbook, and when it's all over, they have more money and power, and the rest of America is worse off. Everyone needs to understand that self-inflicted emergencies like this will destroy faith in capitalism. Reaganism promised a system in which you took your chances and had to live with the results. But that's not the system we have. And young people can't be tricked into believing that it is. Every time rich people get bailed out, it's going to further corrode what little faith is left in our system. And as for 2024, this demonstrates that Republicans will need to focus on the economy, not woke schools or transgenderism. I'm not saying those issues aren't important, they are. But this is going to be an election like 1980, and once again, it's the economy, stupid. Donald Trump instinctively understands this. Ron DeSantis will need to understand this as well and surround himself with populist conservatives who understand markets and why we can't allow this twisted game of spending and borrowing and bailing out to continue. Now, SVB wasn't the case of the government thinking it was too big to fail the bank. SVB was too Democrat to fail, too connected to Biden. He can't afford to lose support in Silicon Valley and expect he'll win in 2024, and he knows it. But remember this. The same folks who are applauding the Biden bailout never blink twice when working class people lose their jobs to outsourcing or to a workplace flooded with illegal labor. When pain is felt by blue-collar types, the globalist response is essentially evolve or die. So we need a financial system that's transparent and clear to everyone. Not one where certain rich people have access to unlimited funds because they're able to intimidate unelected bureaucrats into letting them have their way. It's farcical to say that every time a single bank fails, we'll have a crisis that will sink the whole system. That is a bluff that should be called. Otherwise, going forward, it will always be heads they win and tails we lose. And that's the angle.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.